Ray, how are you doing today?
Keith, I am doing fantastic. Thanks so much for having me on. I really appreciate it.
So you do something that I am really unfamiliar with. Now, I'm going to give you some backstory before I ask you for some backstory. My background is in higher education. So I've been teaching in the college classroom for easily 15 years. Now, right now, it's in IT, routing, switching, Microsoft products, and Azure Cloud. And I used, case studies and uh, things like that to kind of really get my students involved in understanding the application. And I don't use any kind of game-based structure. So I'm really at a loss. But this sounds so fascinating because when we first talked about it, you were just on point. You knew what you were going to say, but it was really exciting to think about an alternative to the classroom because, quite frankly, adults, just like kids, get bored in the classroom. So there has to be something out there that not only provides content and structure, but excitement and I don't even want to use the word, but I'm going to use it anyway, entertainment, because we got to keep them engaged. So I know that's a big intro for me. What's going
No,
on in the higher ed classroom?
yeah, no, I mean that's fantastic. And Keith, I absolutely share that passion of wanting to bring engagement and life and structure into the higher ed classroom. So a little bit of my background. I'm a 26-year veteran of the U.S. Army. I retired last year.
Well,
Had a bunch
congratulations.
of different jobs in the Army, but my final set of positions was I was teaching faculty at the U.S. Military Academy at West Point. I was primarily an administrator. I ran one of our leader development centers and then also ran our faculty development program. But because everybody who is faculty at West Point teaches, I was also teaching on the side. I was teaching history. And the whole time that I was teaching, I really found amazing applications for classroom games. Most of what I did was role-playing games, but occasionally I branched out into a board game and sometimes into a digital game. It really just kind of depended on the audience. And I loved the interaction and I loved the reaction that I got from people. And I loved the buy-in that I got. So when I was thinking about, well, what do I want to do when I retire from the Army? What's next? What's the next big thing for me? I went back and forth on a couple of things. Do I want to be an administrator somewhere else? Do I want to be teaching faculty somewhere else? And when I sat down and really thought about what engages me, what gets me excited, what gets me charged to get out of bed in the morning, it was those times when I was really able to help faculty make a breakthrough in their classroom or see new opportunities for great teaching, see new opportunities for methodology. And so that combined with my love of using games in the classroom really combined to pave the way for what I'm doing now. I run a small company called 42 Educational Games Coaching and Design. And what we do is we help higher ed faculty and some corporate educators as well who want to incorporate games-based learning into their learning spaces, but don't really know how to do it, aren't really sure kind of how to tackle it. Games-based learning, I mean, as you yourself said, it can feel very daunting. It can feel very, wow, I don't even know where to begin. I don't even know where to start. That's totally understandable,
Well,
right?
before you
Yeah, go ahead.
continue, can we go back two steps? Because I
Sure.
know you're excited and I'm excited too. 27 years in the Army,
26.
26 years in the Army, taught at West Point, taught faculty at West Point how to be better faculty, and then took this to the civilian higher ed place.
Yeah.
That one is incredible. So one, again, thank you for your service. I'm going to make sure I get that out there. But two, what you said was and I'm going to paraphrase, your passion was to make teaching better, to make it more impactful.
Yep.
And that's not an easy challenge. I mean, that's a challenge. That's not an easy thing to do. That is
Sure.
straight up a challenge. And I know a lot of people out there, LinkedIn and across the globe, are trying to figure that out. Now, there's a lot of old school people out there like me who kind of, when I wanted to get in, when I became a doctor, I thought becoming a doctor, PhD, all I had to do is do a couple of research papers a year and stand in front of, freshmen and sophomores a couple times a week. And I thought that was the life. And between the 80s and 90s and today, college is different.
The world has
College is
changed.
complete. The world has changed.
Yes.
And nobody cared about keeping students engaged back in the 90s. That wasn't even something we talked about. But you're making it a passion and a purpose. So, but why? Why? Because it's not just about making your instructor better.
Yeah.
That's going to cross over to the learning experience.
Yeah, that's absolutely right, Keith. And this isn't just about trying something new, trying something flashy because it's new and flashy. I'm an advocate for game-based learning first and foremost because it's an incredibly effective method of pedagogy. There are all kinds of studies out there that talk about how games foster cognitive, behavioral, affective, sociocultural engagement with subject matter across disciplines, whether you're talking about humanities, social sciences, whether you're talking about STEM, doesn't matter. Games have empirically proven outcomes in all of those fields. Games have been shown to have great impact on skill development. When you're talking about current and future skill development, right? That has become, I think, much more of a point of emphasis in college, especially in the last 10 years, is how are we preparing people for jobs? Well, games are a great way to do that. The confidence that games build, the creativity, the ability to adapt and think on your feet, all of those really translate directly into skill development. And for me, I think the final thing, and the thing that I really love about game-based learning and that really sold it for me when I saw it in my students, is because games force students to inhabit a different identity. They are amazing for building empathy, for building understanding, right? For being able to see the world through someone else's eyes. And I feel pretty comfortable in saying, regardless of where you fall on the political spectrum, that I think we could all agree that the world would be better if a lot of us could see the world through other people's eyes.
I think that would help.
Yeah.
But can you give us, an example of how and when that you've used this in any way, shape, or form? So just now you talked about, building empathy and building aptitude and building confidence. Can you give us an example? Can you give me an example?
Yeah, absolutely. I'll actually give you the example that first sold me on game-based learning back when I was a brand new instructor in my first year of teaching. So the way military faculty go through West Point, you typically as a military faculty, you first come for a 3 or 4 year rotation through as an instructor and assistant professor. And so you're really kind of entry-level faculty. You come in, you teach there for a couple of years, and then you go back out into the Army. And that was what I did. I came in initially for a 3-year period, 3.5-year period between 2005 and 2009. And that whole time, the only courses that I taught were entry-level first-year history survey courses.
Oh my.
And because of the way West Point designs its core course, they were all courses that those students, those cadets, did not have a choice in picking, right? The cadets that were in my section didn't say, oh, I want to take a Western civilization course, or I want to take a Russian history course. The Army said, hey, guess what? You're taking a Western Civ course next semester. You're taking a Russian history course. So it's fair to say that probably a third to a half of my students were in my section involuntarily, okay?
Probably more than that.
Well, and I'm being conservative, right? But let's just say the numbers that I can support, 1/3 to 1/2.
Okay.
And I knew that coming in, and I was amazingly nervous about how am I going to reach these folks who don't necessarily want to be here. I knew lecture was not going to cut it, and so I was wrestling with a bunch of different active pedagogies. And on about my 6th lesson teaching, I came up with this idea. The lesson was on Greek philosophers. And I came up with this idea. I decided, all right, we're going to do a role play on Greek philosophers. And the way I set it up was I told the class, all of you are organized into different groups. You guys are representing students of Plato. You guys are representing the Stoics. You guys are representing the Epicureans, a bunch of different ones. And my son at the time was just starting preschool, so his education was kind of on my mind. And I said, your job, Greek philosophers, is to convince me that your school of thought is what I should use to raise my son.
Wow.
Your school of thought is how I should teach my son. And not only do you have to convince me of the validity of your school, but you need to undercut the other guys too, right? Because it's not enough just to make a case for yourself. You got to show why the other guys are flawed. It took off like a rocket. I had not seen any kind of engagement like that up to that point. The students came alive. They were plotting. They made, first and foremost, I want to say, they made great arguments. They made detailed, evidence-based, very clear and very well-reasoned arguments that not only presented historically accurate facts, but showed analytical reasoning. So they weren't just regurgitating from the text. They were making an argument using analytical reasoning to not only present their side, but then to go after their buddies, where they would ask their buddies questions of, well, tell me, Mr. Stoic, well, what about this? Isn't this problematic in your philosophy? Well, Platonic, maybe, but let's talk about what's problematic in your philosophy. And they just went after each other for 45 minutes. I had
in a very civil manner.
Yeah, in a civil manner. Yeah, when I say went after each other,
I know.
in a reasonable.
Well, I'm still thinking you're Army though, so I'm still thinking. Okay.
I had to shut down the debate at the end. I was like, folks, we're out of time on this. There's some other material I got to talk about. So that was what originally sold me for game-based learning, was seeing that response as a brand new college instructor. I said, man, I am all in on this. And so every we typically divide our semester up into 3 kind of blocks of material. So each semester is divided up into thirds. And so for every block, I made sure that I had some kind of lesson long game, at least one, that was going to that I could count on to really get folks fired up and engaged. And I saw it over and over again in my sections. I saw it in their learning outcomes. I saw it in how they were writing. I saw it in their ratings of the course and of my section, that my section was consistently rated higher. And the students themselves said that one of the reasons why they rated it that way was because they got so much out of the games. So for me, I can, anecdote is certainly not the singular of data. But I'm one data point. And as I said, there's a number of empirical studies, peer-reviewed studies out there that show these similar kind of effects out there, regardless of discipline.
So now you're in a situation where, from that experience, and now that you're in the civilian world, you create well, let me ask you, I was going to make the assumption.
Yeah.
Do you create your own game-based games now, or do you use like somebody else's platform and just kind of teach how to use those tools?
Yeah, so I have written my own games. I have 1 or 2 what we call micro games, kind of single lesson games that right now are available through the Reacting to the Past consortium. But really what I found in working with clients is that it's much more effective for me to go out and find an existing game, a published game out there, and then do whatever adaptations are necessary to make it work well for the client. And the reason why that seems to be the preferred is really a couple things. One, it's cheaper and faster, right? If I'm working with an off-the-shelf game, from my first conversation with a client to delivery is probably about 2 weeks, maybe 3 weeks if I have to, wait for shipping, supply chains, being what they are. But 2 to 3 weeks. And consequently much cheaper.
Do you pick the game, or is that kind of a conversation you have with your client?
So generally I will get a sense of what they're looking for, and then I will go out and look through different libraries. This is one of the things that I can do that the average teacher cannot, right? Is I can really take the time and cultivate these libraries and cultivate these connections. My Twitter feed is just exploding with all these different game designers and game retailers who have just libraries of incredible games, right? And no one can expect the average faculty member to do that, right? The average faculty member has to be focused on their discipline. They have to be focused on their institution, not only on teaching, but also on the service and scholarship that we ask them to do as well. So that's what I bring to the table, is that those networks of game libraries. So once I've got a sense from, not only from the teacher of, okay, here's my classroom context, here's my learning outcomes, here's the folks I'm teaching. The other thing that I have to get a sense from them is their institutional context, right? Because I have to know what their institution will and won't allow.
Yeah, I was
There are
going to
some
ask that
institutions,
because that's a balance.
yeah, absolutely. I mean, there are some institutions that love the idea of using board games in the classroom, but role playing is a no-go because people are just a little too worried about something getting captured on a phone. Oh, no, sorry, you can't do that. And there's other institutions that role playing is fine, but they don't have the infrastructure to support a digital game. And again, that's just, it's not inherently good or bad. It's just the reality of that institution. But I've got to understand that about a client, because if I deliver a game to a client that the client loves, but the institution hates, I haven't done that client any favors. In fact, I've probably put them in jeopardy. Once I understand that, then I can usually go out and find an off-the-shelf game, off the shelf, figuratively speaking, that works for them. But then it's not enough to turn around and just dump the game in their lap, right? And hey, here's the game, good luck, hope it works out for you. Typically what I'll do is some kind of adaptation so that that game fits perfectly in that learning context. Maybe that's a syllabus insert that's 1 or 2 pages of explanation. Maybe it's a cheat sheet. Maybe cheat sheet being like a quick reference card for playing the game. Maybe it's an explainer video to talk their students through it. Maybe it's even an adaptation of the game. So, let's say that the game is primarily designed as face-to-face, but the course is remote or asynchronous. So maybe it's an adaptation of the game so that it can be run asynchronously. All of those are definitely within the world of possibilities. But the bottom line is I'm committed that when I deliver that game back to that educator, they can take what I've given them, they can turn around and put it right to use in their classroom and use it again and again as many times as they want to. That's my guarantee, and that's what I owe to that educator.
So this is where one of those, can you give us an example, would really come in handy, because anybody who's
Absolutely.
watching or listening would love to say, well, because I think when we think, I'm thinking games and I'm thinking, again, old person here, Clue, Monopoly, maybe Yahtzee. I mean, I don't know what games are really intuitive to the classroom, and can you give
So
us an example?
let me give you kind of 2 examples on slightly different ends of the spectrum.
Okay.
I love that you mentioned Monopoly because it's one of my go-to examples. A colleague of mine at West Point, Morton Ender, created a variant on Monopoly that I periodically recommend to clients that is really useful for teaching the impacts of different socioeconomic strata. So it's a standard Monopoly game. You can, the Monopoly board that is probably, dusty in your house because it hasn't been played in 5 years, because every time somebody plays it, they get into an argument. We've all been
Well, I've
there.
been there.
Yeah. But you just take a standard Monopoly board and lay it out there. The key in this game is that everybody plays by different rules depending on what socioeconomic strata they're assigned to.
Wow.
So if you are upper class, you get more money when you pass go. You spend less time in jail when you land in jail. Your die rolls are actually different. When you roll the dice, you can actually add 1 or 2 spaces onto it. Whereas if you're in lower socioeconomic strata, and especially if you're playing as a person of color, you're being impacted differently. You're redlined from purchasing certain properties. You get treated differently when you get sent to jail. And all of this is stuff that is not just, pulled out of thin air. It is stuff that's supported by research that comes along with the game package, showing this inequitable treatment. So you can hear about this all you want to in the classroom and say, wow, that sounds terrible. But when you actually live it in the game, when you actually see somebody lapping you and getting this unequal treatment because the rules are different, it really gets the point across of, oh
Oh,
wow,
wow.
yeah,
Yeah.
that is what that feels like. So there's one example of a game adaptation.
Okay.
On the other end of the spectrum, there's a series called Reacting to the Past, which is a set of history-based role-playing games. And one conversation that I'm having with an institution right now, those games are primarily designed for face-to-face role playing, right? So a bunch of people in the classroom breaking down into groups. Well, of course, we've all gotten our taste now of remote learning. Many of us have gotten a taste of asynchronous learning. And for many folks, that is going to remain a part of the portfolio for one reason or another. And so the conversation that I'm having with an institution right now is, what does it look like to adapt some of those role-playing games that were primarily designed for face-to-face into an asynchronous environment where it can be played on Slack, where it can be played on the institution's learning management system. And I'm tremendously excited about that, because I think what it really will do is broaden the accessibility and broaden the appeal of these games and put another tool in the toolkit for people who are teaching remote and asynchronous.
Wow. I wish I could learn more about that. But the Monopoly game, it seems very much, very realistic and very impactful. And I tend to use that word a lot because, I come from a D&D background, not heavy into the playing, but I love the ideology and the idea of it. And I love, how you can get immersed to it in it and then experience what that adventure is like. It's kind of like going into a book and reading it and taking over one of the characters as yourself. Um, but my next question was, damn it, I forgot what my next question was. That was a first, and I'm the question guy. Uh, was really about, what is your favorite takeaway experience, your favorite takeaway experience from doing what you do? So is there like something that you say, this was, if I could do this over and over again, this was the experience I want to have with a client?
So
Or
I'll share one with a student, and then one with a client. The one with a student was that one of the students that I taught during my first tour of teaching at West Point from 2005 to 2009, when I came back for my second and final tour, this student had actually joined the faculty at the same time, had joined as one of these junior military officers, and told me that, and he was teaching in a different department, but he told me specifically that he was using games in his classroom because of the experience that he had had in my classroom. That it was so memorable for him. And again, keep in mind, this was his first semester as a first-year student, and he's now probably almost 12 years removed from that.
wow.
But it was meaningful and powerful enough to him that he wanted to replicate that experience for his own students, that he wanted them to have that. So, I mean, boy, you love it when you see students succeed regardless. But when you see a student succeed by taking the things that you've done and making them better, oh man, that gets you in the heart. It gets you in the soul. It gets you in the soul right away.
Yeah.
In terms of working with clients, I've only been working with clients now for about a year, so my experience based on that is a little shy. But I think the biggest thing, one of the things that I do, I mentioned the reacting games, and I work with them as what's called a development editor, which is where I work with authors who they're writing and developing games, but they need a little bit of help, right? Maybe they're jammed with particular faculty requirements, or maybe they need to focus on something else. But regardless, I can partner with them and I can get a sense of what the game needs, and I can do a focused 30-day push on that game and get it to where it's ready. And so I've worked on about 6 of those now in the last year and a half, and it has really been amazing to me to now see kind of the first 3 or 4 that I've worked on having now kind of gone into the final stage of publication review, and hopefully actually getting published here in the very near future. It's been really it's been really inspiring and really gratifying to know that the primary vision was still the authors, right? It was their game, it was their vision. What I was able to do was work with them and just kind of give it that extra boost, give them some help when they needed it, and then let them continue to run with their game and their product. That to me is what it's all about, helping faculties to succeed with what they want to do on their terms, on their timeline. And to me, that's what it's all about.
So what I think I just heard you say was that you help other people develop games from their content.
I have done that,
Oh,
absolutely. And
okay.
it's a lot of fun and I love doing it.
Well, the reason I ask you that, and we're on record, so I'm going to go on record with this, is that I've just finished writing a book, and it's co-authored with a colleague of mine. It's a leadership paradigm shift, and it's partly based on his original work, and a lot of it's based on my original work, which kind of puts his content into narrative focus, so that just like in a gameplay situation, people are getting to read like a vignette or like a scenario and then apply the chapter's learning system or leadership system into that situation. But my additional thought was, and this is where the question came from, was I wouldn't mind then translating that into some kind of game structure. And so, but I don't really know how to do that because I've never done it before. And this is, a
Yeah.
matter of fact, my first book. So a lot of it's um, fresh and exciting, but I see the opportunity to turn this into something even more tangible, more doable than just, a training course for leaders in either C-suite or, small business. So I'm going on record here saying that at some point in the near future, I want to come back to you and call on you and say, hey, can you help me develop this? I think it would be a really good idea.
I agree, and it's a relatively short hop from case study methodology to role play, right? What you really need to do is kind of structure the material so that folks understand not only what's being asked of them in role playing, but also kind of the different possible outcomes, right? One of the beautiful things about role play is you don't know what the outcome is going to be, right? It's uncertain. It's not like you're watching a movie, you're watching a play. I love movies. I love plays. I went to see a Broadway show last night. I had a great time. But I'm under no illusion that when I go to see that play, I'm under no illusion that it's going to end any differently than it has, on the 50 shows before what I came and saw. Role play, hey, anything could happen, right? And that's the beauty of it for learning, is that because there's that originality, because there's that freshness, and there's that opportunity for folks to innovate, you really stimulate that creativity. You really stimulate those possibilities. So yeah, Keith, that sounds fantastic, and I would love to do that with you.
Well, good. And I'm on record now saying that. With 30 minutes also almost being up, any kind of final words? And also, I know I'm going to put the links in the descriptions and of course in the newsletter as well as to direct people to find you, but is it just through LinkedIn, Twitter, and a website?
Yeah,
Or
so the website is 42ed, so the number 4, the number 2ed dot games. That's not a typo. That is the actual domain. I grabbed it because it's what we're all about, right? We're about games. So 42ed dot games, and then we are on Facebook, Twitter, LinkedIn, and Instagram, all as at 42ed games. And I would love to have folks reach out. There's a contact form on front and center on the website. Reach out to me if you think that I can help your classroom, if I can help your learning space in some way, because I would love to partner with you.
cool. Well, Ray, thank you so much for your time. It was wonderful. If you could do me a favor, could you hang on so we can kind of debrief after I take us off the recording?
Keith, absolutely happy to do so. And
Thank
thank
you
you
so
so much for the
much.
time.
Absolutely.